In a forgotten corner of the Midwest, there was a small, decaying town called Pine Hollow. Once a thriving place, it had fallen into disrepair over the years, its streets empty, its buildings weathered and cracked. But beneath the surface of this quiet, forgotten town lurked a terror that had haunted the shadows for years, a killer who had taken on the guise of a clown. His name, whispered in fear by those who knew of him, was Smiles. Smiles wasn't like other clowns. He didn't perform at birthday parties or children's events, and he certainly didn't bring joy. His face was permanently twisted into a grotesque, exaggerated grin, painted with garish red makeup that bled into the cracks of his pale skin. His eyes, cold and lifeless, were surrounded by black circles that made them look hollow and sunken. His hair was a mess of tangled, dirty yellow curls, sticking out wildly from his head. He wore a filthy, tattered clown suit, once bright and colorful, now faded and stained with grime and blood. Smiles didn't hunt his victims in broad daylight. He was a creature of the night, stalking the darkened streets of Pine Hollow when the rest of the town was asleep. His favorite haunt was the old carnival grounds, an abandoned relic of the town's better days. The once vibrant Ferris wheel now stood rusted and still, its metal creaking in the wind. The tents were tattered, flapping in the breeze like the remnants of a nightmare. And the funhouse, where distorted mirrors once entertained children, had become Smiles' lair. It was here, in the shadows of the funhouse, that Smiles lured his victims. He was methodical in his hunting. He would watch them first, sometimes for days, sometimes for weeks. He liked to learn their routines, their habits, their secrets. Smiles took pleasure in knowing every detail of their lives before he ended them. It gave him a sense of control, a twisted satisfaction in playing God. His victims were always ordinary people, people who wouldn't be missed right away. A drifter passing through town, a teenager sneaking out at night, a lonely man drinking his sorrows away at the local dive bar. Smiles would follow them in the dark, keeping to the shadows, his presence a lingering dread that they could never quite place. And when the moment was right, he would strike. Smiles had a signature method, one that was both horrifying and deliberate. He carried with him a set of oversized, sharpened knives, each blade meticulously polished to a gleaming finish. The handles were wrapped in faded ribbons of red and white, giving them the appearance of carnival prizes. But these were no toys. These were tools of death. He liked to toy with his victims, to watch the fear bloom in their eyes as they realized what was happening. His twisted grin never faltered as he stalked toward them, the blades glinting in the moonlight. And then, with a speed that belied his awkward, shambling gait, he would lash out. The cuts were precise, delivered with an almost artistic flair. Smiles didn't kill quickly, he liked to draw it out, to savor the terror and pain in his victims' eyes as they struggled to stay alive. He would paint their bodies with deep, jagged wounds, letting the blood flow like crimson ribbons. And all the while, he would giggle, a high-pitched, deranged sound that echoed through the empty carnival grounds. Once his victims were dead, Smiles would arrange them like grotesque works of art. He would pose their bodies in strange, unnatural positions, draping them across carnival rides or propping them up in the funhouse. He would paint their faces with his own twisted version of clown makeup, smearing bright red lipstick across their cold, pale lips and painting wide, exaggerated smiles on their faces. And then he would disappear, vanishing into the night like a ghost, leaving nothing behind but the macabre scenes he had created. The police were baffled by the killings. They found the bodies, but they never found any clues. No fingerprints, no DNA, nothing that could lead them to the monster who haunted Pine Hollow. And the town's residents, already on edge from years of decay and hardship, became consumed by fear. They knew that Smiles was out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for his next victim. But no one dared to speak of him openly. It was as if acknowledging his existence would somehow draw him closer. But Smiles didn't care about their fear. In fact, he thrived on it. The more the town cowered in terror, the more powerful he felt. He was the puppet master, pulling the strings, controlling the narrative. And as long as he remained in the shadows, he was untouchable. Then came the night when Smiles found his most prized victim yet, a young woman named Emily, who had just returned to Pine Hollow after years away. Emily was different from the others. She was strong, determined, and unafraid of the darkness that had swallowed her hometown. She had come back to confront her past, to face the demons that had driven her away in the first place. But she hadn't counted on encountering the nightmare that was Smiles. Smiles watched Emily for days, fascinated by her defiance. She didn't shy away from the dark streets or the crumbling buildings. She walked with purpose, unafraid of the shadows. And that intrigued him. He wanted to break her, to see the fear in her eyes, to make her one of his twisted masterpieces. One night, Smiles followed Emily to the old carnival grounds. She had come there to confront the memories of her childhood, but Smiles saw it as the perfect opportunity. He stalked her through the maze of decaying rides and tents, his knives gleaming in the moonlight, his twisted grin fixed on his face. But Emily wasn't like his other victims. She didn't run when she saw him. Instead, she stood her ground, her eyes locked on his grotesque face. And in that moment, Smiles felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, hesitation. She wasn't afraid of him. She wasn't cowering or pleading for her life. She was facing him head-on, and that unnerved him. For the first time, Smiles faltered. His movements were slower, less precise. And Emily took advantage of that. She fought back with a ferocity that caught him off guard. She wasn't just trying to survive, she was trying to destroy him. The battle between them was brutal. Smiles slashed at her with his knives, but she was quick, dodging his strikes and landing blows of her own. The carnival grounds echoed with the sounds of their struggle, the clang of metal, the thud of bodies hitting the ground, the ragged gasps of breath. And then, with a final, desperate lunge, Emily drove a piece of shattered mirror into Smiles' chest. He staggered back, his twisted grin finally faltering as he looked down at the shard of glass embedded in his flesh. Blood oozed from the wound, staining his filthy clown suit. For the first time, Smiles felt fear. He stumbled, his body weakening, the life draining from him. And as he fell to the ground, his grotesque grin finally faded. The high-pitched giggle that had once echoed through the carnival grounds was silenced forever. Emily stood over him, her chest heaving with exhaustion and adrenaline. She had faced the monster that had haunted Pine Hollow for years, and she had won. But as she looked down at Smiles' lifeless body, she couldn't shake the feeling that the darkness hadn't truly left. The town was still decaying, still crumbling under the weight of its own history. And somewhere, in the shadows, the echoes of Smiles' laughter still lingered.